Welcome back to another episode of Chatroom with Shizza. Today in the chatroom, I have with me a political analyst and now also an author, all the way from Germany, actually Bangkok, but I have so much to talk about. Ladies and gentlemen, he's been here in South Asia, also been here in Pakistan for quite a while, so this is absolutely appropriate for him to be here answering my questions. I have with me Marc Saxer. Hi, welcome to the chatroom with Shizza.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
It's my pleasure. Busy day today. There was a book launch.
There was a book launch at the ISSI. I'm very happy they had me. So it's my new book, which had just come out. It's called The Wolf World. And it tries to lay out, all the changes in the world that we see in the news and analyze it in more greater depth. What are the geopolitical competition, geoeconomic competition, and what does that do to the international order?
And I want to talk about all of that. First, about the event only. I hear that the book is almost published, but the event was already held. So is that a common thing to do with book launches? Because I know some people also do book cover launches. While the book is yet to be written, they just launch the cover. But yours is about to be published. How soon should it hit the market?
It is printed, as far as I know, but it's somehow sitting in a warehouse in London or in Oxford somehow. I think it's just been a bit delayed. It's not ideal to have a book launch without a book, I have to say.
Well, I mean, as long as you have the idea, why not, right?
Yes.
And talking about the idea, Wolf World, what are we expecting from this? Can you break down how did you come up with the thought? What does it mean to you, Wolf World?
Well, it's basically a quote by Thomas Hobbes, a man is another man's wolf. And so it kind of invokes this kind of ruleless world where might makes right. It's the law of the jungle. And I think that's pretty much an apt description of the geopolitical situation. You have basically great powers have returned to warfare. You have an escalation of conflict all around the globe. Great powers, smaller powers are disobeying international law, ridiculing it actually. And that all makes this kind of lawless, ruleless wolf world that I'm talking about.
And what an interesting, unfortunate, yes, but what an interesting time to be in, to be observing all of this. So for you being a political analyst and then viewing this through your lens of, let's say, wolf world, and I want to come to transformative, realism also, but through that lens, how do you feel like about the times that we're going through? Let's talk about South Asia first. We're embroiled in regional conflicts, and then, of course, bearing the brunt of global conflicts as well. What do you think Pakistan specifically is going through right now?
Well, if I talk to people in the region, in particular in Pakistan, the first answer is, Mark, look, it was never a rule-based order. It was never a liberal order. For us, it was always a wolf world, and we're used to navigating it. And I must say, if you look at what Pakistan is doing on the international stage right now, it is acting very clever. Right? So maybe for you, it's easier to maneuver and navigate this wolf world than it is for someone who comes from Europe, and which has been living in this liberal garden for a long time.
Right. And at the risk of tooting our own horn, I think Pakistan did amazing diplomatically, especially, in terms of dialing down the conflict in Iran against, of course, the US and Israel, being a facilitator and then a mediator as well. Has that put us in a better position?
Well, it puts you in a good position, I think, on the world stage. If you can finalize this deal, I think that is written on another page. I think it's quite complicated, to be honest. I don't think the two parties are anywhere close to each other. So maybe you have to host them a couple more times, yes. Which means that you have a lot of shutdowns in the city, from what I learned. But I think Pakistan did cut a good figure on the international stage.
Right. I think this in itself was a huge feat to bring them both on the same table, face to face. I want to take you back to 1998. Pakistan became the first nuclear state in the Muslim world and the seventh, generally speaking. We're proud of that. And it is definitely at the defense end of it. We are not an offensive nation. Do you think attaining that capability gave Pakistan a better position globally or regionally? What would Pakistan be without it?
Well, I guess that's maybe a question of the time frame. I think at the time, it, first of all, made you a bit of an outcast, if you recall that. Obviously, that was a breach of the Non-Proliferation Treaty.
But then we did sign it.
And then you did
Yeah.
sign it, and you were brought back in, right? But it was, I think, there was a different time,
Yeah.
right? So maybe it's not a liberal world order, maybe it wasn't that much of a rule-based world order, but it was a different time. It was what you call Pax Americana. It was what definitely the unipolar moment under American hegemony. So the Americans, I think, did play somewhat of a stabilizing role in the world. Maybe not so much in the region, but in the world. And now it's a different world. It's the wolf world is a dangerous place. I think military power has become a factor again to be considered. So I guess a lot of states are now considering this question
Of attaining nuclear
of
capability.
attaining nuclear capability.
Do you
Yes.
think that is going to happen for newer states to come in? Is it going to go beyond 11?
Well, I mean, if the US continues to push its alliances to a breaking point, a couple of countries will have to consider how that leaves them exposed. And I think this is automatically a driver for these kind of situations.
I want to understand your version of realism. For me, it seems like a blend of liberalism and realism. You're kind of at the cusp. Can you explain to the audiences, in simple layperson terms, probably, what is your theory and how did you come about it?
Well, realism in very simple terms simply means that you look at the world as it is and you look at through the lens of the balance of power, right? So before you do anything at all, you need to understand what the balance of the forces, what the balance of the power is, which is usually quite sobering because it's very often not in your favor. And the classical realist thought in the international theory would be to try to create an equilibrium of power, a balance of power in order to bring stability into a situation, right? I do believe that in our time and age, given the challenges that we're facing, from climate change to pandemics, from the question of war and peace, all the way to the AI revolution, this is not enough. Stability in itself is not enough. The status quo is unsustainable. So the transformative part, what I call transformative realism, is trying to bring solutions to these things, but through the lens of realism. So that means we need to tilt. I mean, let's say change is always a rupturous thing. It creates winners and losers. So there's always players who would prefer the status quo to stay because they have a lot to lose when it comes to change. So at the end of the day, what you need to do is you need to build broad alliances in order to break through the resistance of those who support the status quo in order to bring change. Mm-hmm. So it is, as you say, a blend. It is heavily realist influence because it's focused on this balance of power thinking, but it's also somewhat of a forward-thinking, transformative thing, which may be constructivist in its ideas. It has an element of social engineering into it and goes beyond the classical realist or neo-realist thought.
Does that make you a hopeful cynic?
I'm a German, so I'm pessimist by nature.
Love it. Got it. So technology and climate crisis and multiple other things at the moment are used as geopolitical weapon. You've been here, you've seen things firsthand and in many different countries. How do you think, first of all, things are translating at household level for people, not just governments? And then how are the governments in South Asia tackling this since it has become a geopolitical weapon?
Well, obviously, everyone in the world, but in particular this region, is now at the receiving end of the fallout, of the shockwaves that come from this third Gulf War. Obviously, there are questions of energy supply. There are questions of energy price hikes, foodstuff price hikes, fertilizer price hikes, and actually also shortages. So I think in the short run, we're going to look at inflation. We're going to look at shortages when it comes to food, pretty much in every country that cannot afford to buy from the global market at premium prices. So that is a difficult thing to do. If governments are now reacting, as you say, and I think they need to react in order to alleviate these kind of, especially the food crisis, but also the livelihoods of a lot of people depend on the gasoline prices, right? These governments have to spend a lot of money. And that puts governments that are on the back foot anyway when it comes to sovereign debt into even more difficult position. So I think the second wave of what we're going to see is a more sovereign debt crisis, maybe even some insolvencies. And these will create ripple effects into the financial system, both in the global north, where you're going to have probably ruptures when it comes to the expectations of economic growth. I think you have a strong recessionary pressures fly in the air, especially if central banks need to raise interest rates in order to fight inflation. And that will cool down economic growth in the global north. And it makes it very, very dangerous for countries who have sovereign debt in foreign currencies.
And this is one thing after another. So, just like from 2020 onward, I think if we look at it, then we have the pandemic and then the Russia-Ukraine war, and now this, Middle East conflict, very much growing at the moment, of course, involving US, Israel, and Iran. How do you suggest, or rather, a piece of advice from you probably for the public to deal with or brace themselves for the upcoming inflation or the recession?
I find it difficult to imagine a scenario where this can be completely avoided. So I think it would be best, as I said, I'm a realist, so I think we have to look at the facts. I think the shockwaves are already in the system. The question is now where they pop out, right? So is it going to be a recession? Is it going to be inflation? Is it going to be a financial crisis? I do not know. But I think if you think back at the 2008 financial crisis, it was actually the trigger was the subprime crisis in 2007. So it almost took 1 year for the shock waves to actually reach the surface and create that financial crisis that we then have seen on TV, right? I think, or it may be well be, that we're in a very similar situation. It's already in the system, but it hasn't caused that kind of crash yet.
Okay. And while, of course, this is an ongoing situation, and like you said, at the moment it doesn't look like it can be avoided, capitalism doesn't take a break.
Well, you're actually hitting an interesting point, and that is that the tech stocks are doing quite well. I think this may or may not be a little bit of a myopic view of financial investors. The big tech companies have been showing good numbers, and then you had this talk about the crisis in the Persian Gulf somewhat stabilizing and cooling down, and immediately the tech stock shot up. I think you and I know that the crisis in the Persian Gulf is nowhere close to being resolved. It's rather likely that it's going to escalate again. All the systemic risks that we mentioned, right? Energy, food prices, inflation are also there. So I think, in my view, the stock markets are acting a little bit narrow-sighted at the moment. They're not pricing in the risk.
Right. And you have also mentioned that neoliberalism is hollowing out democracies. Can you explain that?
Well, I mean, if you look at what is happening, and I think that is one of the main theories or the main thesis of the book, is that we have this twin crisis of liberalism. The stuff that we're going to talk in a minute, I assume, is, of course, the global stuff, the rise of authoritarian great powers, the decline of the liberal West, and the end of the liberal world order. So that's the global dimension. But at the same time, you have this assault of illiberal forces against liberal institutions back at home, actually everywhere in the world, but also including the Western liberal democracies. And where does that come from? Where does this anger come from? Where does this frustration come from? I think it is a reaction to the hollowing out of the economies. I mean, this is the whole Rust Belt narrative that we see, that globalization, automation shipped a lot of the shops overseas. So you have entire communities which lost their livelihoods. But it's also that kind of culture wars that are going on where people feel that they're not part of a community anymore, they're not respected anymore, and so on, right? So this is a phenomenon that is happening everywhere, and I believe it's a reaction to the neoliberal wave that we had 40 to 20, I think it was over since 2008, but it was quite a long time.
I'm going to start with you speaking about anger and frustration among public, and this is probably all across the globe. Definitely a trust deficit. Do you think, is there a way out for governments and states to actually win back that trust? Are we going to start from scratch? How's that going to happen?
Actually, I would even reinforce what you said. I think it's absolutely imperative that we do. So what people like me do, and all of the think tanks in the world, is we say, look, so we have this security situation, so we need to do A, B, Z, right? The problem is that in the real world, in the policy-making world, almost nothing is happening. It's moving very, very slow. And the reason for that is this underlying, I call it a populist moment. So if you talk to anyone on the street or your taxi driver, your grandma, it doesn't matter. It's just like normal people. They would say three things. Number one, they say, we understand things cannot stay the way they are. They're probably going to get worse. Number two, they say, we feel that we're not being told the entire truth. And we have even a suspicion that the liberal elites don't understand themselves what's happening. And number three, we have to pick up the check. And that check is not just money. If we're talking about war, it's about the sons dying in the trenches. That is where the anger comes from. That is where the mistrust comes from. This transfers into a political crisis, which is actually, I mean, you could basically say people do not give a mandate to do the things that need to be done. So we are trapped. Otherwise, we cannot stay. Things cannot stay the way they are. We have to adapt to the new world, but you do not have a mandate for that adaptation. And that creates this kind of sluggish paralysis that we all feel. And all these political crises that you see all over the world with governments falling after 6 months or 1 year or something like that. There is an overall, that's the crisis of liberalism that I'm talking about, that it's not going forward.
What kind of changes do leaderships need to make? Because, of course, there's no country or a nation without its people. Of course, it's a kind of an unreal expectation for them to be happy at the moment, but at least be satisfied with the system. So what leadership changes do we need to have?
Well, number one, I think start by, I mean, I'm not saying the truth in terms of you've been lying before, but I think people really want to know the entire extent of the crisis. Put everything on the table. I think talking it prettier than it is not the right way.
But doesn't that add to the anxiety already?
The anxiety is already there. People already know that something's wrong, but they don't want to know exactly what is wrong, and they also want to know that their leaders understand it and can actually show them what is the issue. And then, of course, you need to come up with a new model. I mean, bringing it back to Pakistan, right? The only successful development model that we ever developed is called the flying geese model, right? It was basically tried, especially in East Asia. So you use cheap labor, export-led growth, catch-up industrialization. All of this is now collapsing. Cheap labor is no longer an advantage in a world of AI, robots.
Absolutely.
Export-led is not possible in a protectionist world when all your markets close up. And catch-up industrialization doesn't work if technology transfer is weaponized and you're cut out of the global supply chains because you're not friend-zoned anymore, basically. Even worse, if you have all the overcapacities being dumped in your markets, you may actually look at deindustrialization. This situation everyone on the planet is facing. And I think that those societies who have the ability to adapt to the new opportunity structures will thrive. And those who, for some internal reasons, cannot, will be falling behind. And that's why this domestic situation is so important. Are you able to adapt? Or do you have maybe a state capture by entrenched elites who veto change because they think they'll be losing out? But in the bigger picture, that means that a country may be stagnating and just slowly falling behind.
And what makes a country ready to adapt? Are we again looking at balance of power in terms of wealth and military?
The inequality certainly plays a role. I think if you look at what is happening around the world, Charles Dickens has wrote this book, A Tale of Two Cities, right? And I think if you look at, let's say, first the emerging countries, and let's say it's China, it's been amazingly successful to alleviate 700 million people out of poverty. But that means there's still 700 million to go if you have a population of 1.4 billion. And as I just said, the old development model is obsolete. So can China alleviate the other? And this is what India has to answer, and Pakistan has to answer, Indonesia has to answer. So that is in terms of upward Can you actually alleviate everyone out of poverty? And now you look at the West, and you've been to Europe, as I just learned. You've been to the US. I mean, honestly speaking, if you walk some of the streets of these cities, I mean, this looks like a developing country, a poor country, right? So that means is the West is actually from the other side approaching the same system. So we may end up in a society where you permanently have an inner core that lives well on the same living standard. Doesn't matter if you're in Beijing or in Amsterdam or in Islamabad, right?
Yeah.
And you have, unfortunately, an ocean of poor people around this. And that creates social unrest. This creates political instability. And sooner or later, it creates conflict and paralysis for the political system. So I think that is a huge factor in the ability to adapt.
What you're saying is that the center remains the center and the periphery remains more peripheral?
That is pretty much what all the economists have been saying for the last couple of years. That's what's in the numbers.
Okay.
I always say, as an analyst, I do not care for my own personal opinion. So I'm not describing a world that I like. But
I would like to know a word that you like. Since you're on my podcast, I would like to know what you're thinking.
Well, I have to actually describe the world as it is.
Okay.
And that's the trend that we're looking at, right? So I cannot wish this away. So I'm sorry that I have so many negative things to say.
No problem. Don't be sorry. You said you were a realist, so
yeah, exactly. I mean, I would say, and that's the whole idea of transformative realism, of course you can't change it, right? But not with the old formulas. I think the way that you have, I mean, if we're looking at things, I mentioned that we need a completely new economic model, right? We also need new state institutions. We need a new relationship between civil society and the state. We need new energy systems. We need new education systems. So it is basically we have to transform the entire systems that we create from top to bottom. And this is the kind of shift in the development path that comes every 100 years. It's not something that you can do with technocratic fingering. It's not like a little bit of screw here and a little bit of screw there that you can optimize. It is a dramatic paradigm shift almost across the board.
Right.
And that is why it's so difficult to implement. First of all, because I think those who bear the responsibility for it almost shy away from the magnitude of what needs to be done. And second of all, because we don't have the answer yet, what is the new system? We simply don't know.
And you also talk about multipolarity. Well, a lot of analysts do and experts do. And of course, I think 21st century is supposed to be that, right? Speaking specifically about this region, how do you see Pakistan playing on that?
Well, on the global level, I talk about a distribution of power that I call asymmetrical multipolarity, which is a little bit different from the multipolarity that is very popular and everyone talks about. I mean, I think the popular narrative is somehow a rise of the global south. I think it's a little bit more complicated than that. I think the world that we're going into going to have two superpowers, the US and China, which I do not believe will be as overwhelming as the US and the Soviet Union used to be in the old Cold War. So they're in a league of their own, but they do not make the system bipolar. And then you have lots of regional powers. Pakistan is one of them, Indonesia. And I mean, you talk about the Middle East, you see that the regional powers are almost more decisive on the ground. From Israel to Iran, from Turkey to Saudi Arabia, there's a lot of regional powers, and you have South Africa and Brazil in the other regions of the world. However, these regional powers cannot project power globally. They are regional powers. And then in the middle, you have three continental-sized question marks: Russia, India, and the European Union. Potentially could be poles, but have so many internal contradictions and weaknesses that we don't even know if they break apart, right? So the answer to your question is that Pakistan, I think, is a regional power and in an asymmetrical multipolar world.
What contributes, all the factors that contribute to Pakistan being a regional power at this moment? What did we do well?
Well, first of all, I think you really sit at the fault lines of a lot of geopolitical situations. I mean, you have maybe sometimes difficult neighbor in Afghanistan. You are creating a deeper relationship with China. You have a difficult situation with India. I think that's no way of describing it otherwise. And you're also a neighbor with Iran, right? So that means your geography, good or bad, puts you into a theater which has always been a hotbed of geopolitics, right? I think that created a kind of people that I meet here. It's like I was joking with my colleague. I think that they teach geopolitics in kindergarten here because people are extremely knowledgeable. I have never met a Pakistani who doesn't have opinions on geopolitics and likes to discuss them.
It's a part of our daily lives.
Absolutely. And that's not the case in many other countries, right? So that means there is a certain literacy for these kind of issues, right, which helps you to navigate them. But of course, at some point, the question is, how can you pivot out of this, right? Because it's a difficult situation, and how can you translate this kind of savvy navigating into development for the people of Pakistan?
You also spoke about how, larger markets. So, for example, yesterday I was reading something on how larger companies are now making an exit from India. Happens to be a huge market, of course, because AI. They don't need cheap labor anymore. They can actually produce huge capital with AI and robotics. Is that something that South Asia or larger economies like India should be worried about? How is that going to change things for them?
Well, one of the comparative advantages that South Asian countries had is that, of course, you speak English very well.
Yeah.
So I think you have millions, by the way, women, mostly women, in this kind of phone banks and back office jobs. Tens of millions of women, actually. And this is one of the first things that's being automated, right? I mean, you used to have a chatbot, and we all know how annoying that is because it was never really working. But now you have an AI who can actually do the job that the chatbot could never do. So that means the automation here, the algorithms and the AI are replacing millions of jobs. And I think that is a big worry because it had, I think, also a women empowerment dimension, which may now collapse. AI is going to, this whole disruptive, and it's going to revitalize our economy.
It's scary for a lot of people.
It's scary for a lot of people,
Yeah.
but the interesting thing is you cannot measure any impact on the overall productivity at all. It's one of the puzzles. I mean, we've been automizing, and things seem to be so much more nifty now that they were before. But if you ask economists and they try to measure the overall productivity per capita, it hasn't really gone up. So what is this AI thing? Is it really going to revolutionize the economy or not? And maybe the reasons why AI is so important is not so much for the economy, but much more with the military.
And do we have any answer to that? Is it going to revolutionize economies?
That one I do not know.
Okay.
I know that companies are spending trillions of dollars because they believe the answer is yes.
Okay.
But that may also be maybe a bubble, right? I don't know.
Trump took 16 major CEOs to China, and this was actually to talk about technological advancements and AI advancements, probably collaborations or exchange of technology or whatnot. How does that make you feel? This is actually a positive note between the both, US and China, don't you think?
Well, the big question here is if you stay within a unified tech stock or if you go into bifurcation. The phone that is sitting in front of you on the table is right now a unified tech stock. It works everywhere. It can be produced in China and the US and Malaysia, doesn't matter. It works, right? But you know that on the software level, it's already bifurcated. So you have the Chinese app world and you have the American-led app world, right? So what could happen now is that also the hardware could bifurcate, right? So you would basically create incompatible techno worlds. And that is, number one, a problem, especially for the American CEOs that you mentioned, because if China is shielding itself off, I mean, the irony of this, I mean, two American administration were threatening China with decoupling, and now China is decoupling from the US.
It's working very well for it.
Yeah. So having these 16 CEOs in Beijing is actually, for me, rather a sign of weakness because they need the Chinese market. right?
Weakness on the US end.
On the US end, right?
Interesting.
But for the rest of us, the Germanys and the Pakistans and the Ecuadors or whatever of the world, this is a huge problem, because if we are not in the lead, the technological lead, and we're going into bifurcated worlds, this will have huge opportunity cost, because if you decide on one side, you lose in the other side, or you have to play in both worlds, which has enormous cost for development, research, standards, investments, all of these things. So for the rest of us, this is pretty bad.
Marc was here in Pakistan 22 years ago, and that was your first job?
That was my first job, exactly.
Can I know more about it?
I started off as a very impressionable young man, as an intern, in fact, for the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung. And so I've been in an office here in Islamabad, sleeping in the basement on one of these beautiful beds that you have there. And they gave me a project in what was back then called the NWFP in Peshawar. It was a young leadership project, and I had the privilege to travel to some of the small towns and find talented young men and women in order to work with them. And for me, that's very, very impressive. And I actually made the choice that this may be the right job for me. So Pakistan did it.
Right. So, 22 years, like you said, an impressionable age. So you must have had a lot to learn. And did it shape your personality in a way where you decided, okay, I am going to choose South Asia for the next few years?
Well, you cannot stay German when you live here, that's for sure, right? You have
Why
to
do you say
soften the
that?
edges a little bit.
Okay.
Well, Germans are very principled and tend to like to order the world into black and white, and that's just not something that works in Asia, and in particular not in South Asia.
Right.
I think I make it to Pakistan at least every 2 years for the last 22 years, which means that I know a lot of people here, have a lot of friends here. Lately, we mostly talk about geopolitics. So, for instance, tomorrow there is going to be a laboratory that brings together some of the thought leaders of Pakistan. What we try to do is really to get people from the different silos into the same room. So you want to have people who are very familiar, seasoned diplomats and IR scholars, but you also want to have economists in the room, and you want to have some tech people in the room, because the situation that we discussed, right, means that everything is changing at the same time, and we need to find formats where you can break the silos and bring all of the knowledges, plural knowledges, together so we can learn from each other. These are usually fascinating endeavors. I thoroughly enjoyed. And that's one of the reasons why I'm here.
Thank you so much for being with us, Marc. This was absolutely insightful for me and my audiences. I will catch you next time when you're back in Pakistan after the book launch, of course, to ask about the response. Ladies and gentlemen, this was Marc. The book Wolf World comes out soon. Let us know in the comments when you do get a hold of it and what you think about it. Conversations never end. I will see you here next week in the chat room with Shizza. Until then, take care.